The stage rattled into Castle Dome, Arizona on the hottest morning of August 1878, and Nora Zimmerman knew the moment she saw her sister's empty bed that she had made the worst mistake of her life by agreeing to this arrangement. Her fingers trembled as she held the note, barely 3 lines scrawled in Victoria's hasty handwriting. "Cannot do this, forgive me. Tell them I died if you must." The paper fluttered to the dusty floor of the boarding house room, and Nora pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to think through the roaring panic in her mind. Victoria had fled. The wedding was tomorrow, and somewhere in this godforsaken desert town, a man named Morgan Garrett waited to marry a woman he had never met, a bride secured through careful correspondence and the promise of a better life. Nora was 22 years old, 3 years older than her wayward sister, and she had spent most of those years cleaning up Victoria's messes. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. Their mother had died 2 years ago, their father before Nora could even remember him, and Victoria had been Nora's responsibility since she was barely more than a child herself. They had scraped by in St. Louis, Nora working as a seamstress while Victoria flitted from one romantic notion to another, never settling, never satisfied. When the letter had come from Morgan Garrett, a mountain man turned ranch owner in the Arizona territory, Victoria had seized upon it like a drowning woman grasping at driftwood. She had responded to his advertisement for a bride with enthusiasm that had seemed almost manic. Nora had warned her, had begged her to consider more carefully, but Victoria had been adamant. She would marry this man, move to Arizona, and finally have the life she deserved, except now she was gone, and the stage that had brought them across half the country had already departed back toward Tucson. Nora stood in the small room, surrounded by their meager belongings, and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. She could tell the truth. She could find Morgan Garrett and explain that his bride had abandoned him before they had even met. But what then? She had no money for passage back to St. Louis. She had no prospects, no family, nothing waiting for her anywhere. And Morgan Garrett had sent money for the journey, money that Victoria had already spent on the tickets and the few new dresses they had purchased in preparation for her new life. Nora walked to the cracked mirror hanging on the wall and studied her reflection. She and Victoria looked alike enough. Both had dark blonde hair that caught gold in the sunlight. Both had blue eyes, though Nora's were darker, more gray than Victoria's bright cerulean. Victoria was prettier, there was no denying that, with her delicate features and easy smile. Nora's face was more angular, her jaw stronger, her expression more serious. But they were close enough in height and build that perhaps, just perhaps, a man who had never seen his bride in person might not notice the substitution. The thought was insane. It was dishonest. It was potentially dangerous. But as Nora stood there in that dusty room, hearing the sounds of Castle Dome stirring to life outside the thin walls, she could not think of any other option that did not end with her starving in the street or worse. She would meet Morgan Garrett. She would become his bride. And somehow she would make this work. The decision, once made, left her trembling. She sank onto the narrow bed and tried to remember everything Victoria had told her about the correspondence. Morgan Garrett was 30 years old, owned a ranch about 10 miles outside Castle Dome, and had come to Arizona 5 years ago after spending years in the mountains of Colorado trapping and hunting. He wanted a wife because, as he had written in his letters, he was tired of being alone and wanted to build something permanent. He had been honest about the hardships of frontier life, about the isolation and the hard work. Victoria had brushed off those concerns with airy confidence. Nora had read some of the letters, enough to know that Morgan wrote with straightforward simplicity, with no flourishes or romantic declarations. He seemed practical, sensible, perhaps a bit rough around the edges, but honest. She clung to that impression now, hoping desperately that an honest man might be a forgiving one, though she had no intention of confessing her deception any time soon. Perhaps never, if she could manage it. She spent the rest of that day preparing herself, altering one of Victoria's dresses to fit her slightly broader shoulders, practicing Victoria's signature in case it was needed, and rehearsing in her mind all the details her sister had shared about their correspondence. By the time evening fell and she lay down to attempt sleep, her stomach was twisted in knots and her mind raced with fears of discovery and consequences. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and brutally hot. Nora, dressed carefully in the pale blue dress Victoria had chosen for the ceremony, pinned her hair up in a style similar to how Victoria wore hers, and forced herself to eat a few bites of the breakfast the boarding house provided. Her hands would not stop shaking. At 10 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Nora opened it to find a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and weather-worn skin. "Miss Zimmerman, I am Mrs. Clara Hughes. My husband is the pastor who will be performing your ceremony. I thought you might like some company on the walk to the church." Nora managed a smile, grateful for the steadying presence. "Thank you. That is very kind." Mrs. Hughes linked her arm through Nora's as they stepped out into the blazing sunshine. Castle Dome was a small town, little more than a main street lined with wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat. The church was at the far end, a simple structure with a cross mounted above the door. "You must be nervous," Mrs. Hughes said gently. "I was terrified on my wedding day, and I had known Harold for 3 years. I cannot imagine how you must feel marrying a man you have never met." "Does everyone know?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That you are a mail-order bride? Oh, my dear, there is no shame in it. Several women in this territory have come the same way. It takes courage to travel so far on faith alone. Morgan is a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but he has helped many folks around here. You are fortunate, I think." They reached the church, and Mrs. Hughes squeezed Nora's arm reassuringly before leading her inside. The interior was blessedly cooler, though still warm. Reverend Hughes stood at the front, a tall man with a full beard going gray, and beside him stood Morgan Garrett, Nora's breath caught in her chest. She had not known what to expect, but certainly not this. Morgan Garrett was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the light from the window behind him. His arms, visible where his white shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, were corded with thick muscle, bronzed from the sun and marked with scars that spoke of a hard life. His hair was dark brown, touched with auburn highlights, and hung past his collar in waves that suggested he cut it himself with little concern for style. His face was all strong lines, a square jaw shadowed with stubble, a straight nose, and eyes that were startling in their intensity, a deep brown that seemed to take in everything at once. He was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not disappointment exactly, but perhaps confusion. Nora realized with sinking dread that Victoria must have sent him a photograph or a very detailed description. And now he was seeing differences he could not quite account for. She forced herself to walk forward, her legs unsteady beneath her skirts. When she reached him, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close he was even more intimidating, but there was something in his face that gentled the raw power of his presence. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or hope. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "I am glad you arrived safely, Mr. Garrett," she managed. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, then turned to the Reverend. The ceremony was brief and simple. Nora spoke her vows in a voice that did not sound like her own, promising to love and honor a man she had known for less than 5 minutes. Morgan's voice was steady as he made his promises, his eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away but somehow prevented it. When Reverend Hughes pronounced them husband and wife, Morgan hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to Nora's forehead. His lips were warm, his breath stirring the loose tendrils of hair at her temple. Nora closed her eyes against the sudden, unexpected surge of emotion. This was real. She was married. She had taken her sister's place, and there was no going back now. Mrs. Hughes embraced her warmly after they signed the marriage certificate. Nora signed Victoria's name with a hand that had gone numb, watching the ink dry and seal her deception into legal record. Morgan shook hands with the Reverend, thanked him quietly, and then turned to Nora. "I have a wagon outside. We should head to the ranch before the heat gets worse." Nora nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She followed him out into the blinding sunlight where a sturdy wagon waited with 2 horses already harnessed. Morgan helped her up onto the seat with a hand at her elbow, his touch careful despite his obvious strength. Then he swung up beside her, gathered the reins, and clicked his tongue to set the horses moving. They rode in silence through the town and out into the open desert beyond. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in its own way, all red rock and scrubby vegetation beneath an endless sky. The heat was oppressive, but a breeze stirred the air as they moved, providing some small relief. After perhaps 20 minutes, Morgan finally spoke. "You look different than I expected." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs. "Different how?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "In your photograph, your face was softer. You seemed, I do not know, younger maybe, but you are still beautiful, maybe more so." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward way, should not have affected her, but Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "People can look different in photographs," she said carefully. "The lighting, the expression, it changes things." "I suppose that is true." He glanced at her sideways. "Your letters were different too. Toward the end anyway. Less flowery, more practical. I like that." Realization dawned on Nora. Victoria must have grown tired of the correspondence. And Nora had helped her compose some of the later letters. So Morgan had already been falling for Nora's words, not Victoria's. The thought was both comforting and deeply unsettling. "I wanted to be honest with you," she said, which was at least partially true. "About what I could bring to a marriage, about who I am." Morgan nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. I am no poet, Nora. May I call you Nora? Yes, please. I am no poet, and I am not going to pretend the ranch is some kind of paradise. It is hard work every day. The house is small, just 3 rooms. We are far from town, But I will provide for you, and I will protect you, and I will never raise a hand to you in anger. That is what I can promise." The sincerity in his voice made Nora's throat tighten. This man deserved better than her deception. But she had made her choice, and now she had to see it through. "That is more than many women have," she said quietly. "I am grateful." They continued in silence after that, but it was a more comfortable quiet. Nora found herself stealing glances at Morgan, taking in the way he handled the horses with easy competence, the way his jaw tensed when they hit a rough patch of road, the way the wind caught his hair and blew it back from his face. He was undeniably handsome in a raw, untamed way that she suspected would have terrified Victoria. Her sister had always preferred refined gentlemen with smooth manners and soft hands. Morgan Garrett was about as far from that ideal as possible, but Nora found she did not mind. There was something reassuring about his solid presence beside her, about the quiet confidence with which he navigated the harsh landscape. She had spent so much of her life worrying and planning and trying to hold things together. The idea of having someone else to share that burden, even if it was built on a foundation of lies, was seductive. The ranch, when it came into view, was more substantial than she had expected. The house was indeed small but well built, with a covered porch and actual glass in the windows. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing near a line of scraggly trees that suggested water. "It is not much," Morgan said, helping her down from the wagon. "But it is solid. I built most of it myself over the past 3 years." "It is wonderful," Nora said, and meant it. After years of living in cramped boarding houses and tiny apartments in St. Louis, the idea of a home of her own, no matter how modest, seemed like a luxury beyond measure. Morgan carried her trunk inside, setting it down in what was clearly the bedroom. Nora followed him in, taking in the sparse but clean furnishings. There was a bed, larger than she had expected and covered with a quilt that looked handmade. A dresser stood against one wall, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin occupied the corner. The floor was wood, worn smooth but clean. "I know it is not what you are used to," Morgan said, and Nora realized he was nervous, his hands opening and closing at his sides as he looked around the room as though seeing it through her eyes. "I can build more furniture. I wanted to make sure the structure was sound first. I wanted you to be safe here." The vulnerability in his voice undid something in Nora. She turned to him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Morgan, I grew up poor. My mother and we lived in one room with a coal stove and a mattress on the floor. This," she gestured around them, "this is more than I dreamed of having, truly." His expression shifted, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Your letters never mentioned hardship." "No," Nora said carefully. "I suppose I was trying to present myself in the best light. But I think we should be honest with each other now. No more pretending to be something we are not." The irony of her words was not lost on her, but she pushed the guilt aside. She would be a good wife to this man. She would work hard and help build this ranch and make a life here. That was its own kind of honesty. Even if her name was a lie, Morgan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "I am glad you are here, Nora. I have been alone a long time." "So have I," she whispered, and realized it was true. Even with Victoria, she had been alone, carrying all the responsibility, making all the decisions. "I want this to work, Morgan. I truly do." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her breath catch. "Then we will make it work, together." He left her alone then to unpack and settle in, saying he needed to tend to the animals and check the water situation. Nora sat down on the edge of the bed and let herself breathe for the first time since she had opened Victoria's note. She had done it. She was married. She had a home. Now she just had to figure out how to be a wife to a man who thought she was someone else. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses on the pegs mounted to the wall, arranging her brush and hand mirror on the dresser. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped carefully in cloth, was her mother's locket. Nora fastened it around her neck, taking comfort in the familiar weight. Her mother would have understood why she did this. Her mother, who had done whatever was necessary to keep her daughters fed and safe, would have made the same choice. As the afternoon wore on, Nora explored the house. The main room was dominated by a stone fireplace and contained a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair, and a small bookshelf. The kitchen was basic but functional, with a cast-iron stove and shelves lined with supplies. Morgan had clearly prepared for her arrival, stocking flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and various other necessities. She found a ham hanging in the cool pantry, along with potatoes, onions, and some canned vegetables. Dinner, at least, she could manage. She set about preparing a meal, falling into the familiar rhythm of work. Cooking calmed her, always had, There was something reassuring about following recipes, about the predictable transformation of raw ingredients into something nourishing. She was stirring a pot of beans when Morgan came back in, dusty and sweating. He stopped in the doorway, staring at her as though he could not quite believe she was real. "That smells amazing," he said. Nora smiled despite her nerves. "It is nothing fancy, just beans and ham and cornbread. I hope that is all right." "It is more than all right. I have been living on jerky and hardtack for weeks. I am not much of a cook." "Well, that is something I can do," Nora said. "I may not know much about ranching, but I know how to cook and sew and keep a house. I will pull my weight here, Morgan. I promise you that." I never doubted it. He moved to the washstand outside the back door, and she heard him splashing water, cleaning up. When he came back in, his hair was damp and slicked back, his face clean. He had changed into a fresh shirt, clearly making an effort for their first meal together. They sat across from each other at the table, and Nora served the food. For a few minutes they ate in silence. Then Morgan said, "This is the best meal I have had in years. Thank you." "You are welcome." Nora hesitated, then asked, "Tell me about the ranch. What do you raise here? What is the plan?" Morgan's face lit up as he began to talk about his cattle, about his hopes to expand the herd, about the challenges of water and grazing in the desert. Nora listened, asking questions, and found herself genuinely interested. He was intelligent and thoughtful, approaching his work with a careful strategy that belied his rough exterior. "What made you come to Arizona?" she asked. "Your letters mentioned Colorado before this." "I spent years in the mountains," Morgan said, "trapping mostly, some hunting. It was beautiful country, but lonely and hard. I watched men die from cold, from accidents, from sheer stupidity. I wanted something different, land I could build on. A future that was not just surviving winter to winter." "Do you miss it? The mountains?" He considered the question. "Sometimes. I miss the quiet, the way the world felt up there. But I do not miss the loneliness, that I was ready to leave behind." "Is that why you sent for a bride?" "Yes." He met her eyes across the table. "I am 30 years old, Nora. I am not a young man anymore. I want a family, children, if God wills it. A partner to share this life with. I know it seems cold, arranging it this way through letters, but I am not a man who knows how to court a woman with pretty words." This seemed more honest, in a way, more practical. Nora thought of Victoria, who had wanted romance and excitement, who had run from this practical, honest man. "I understand," she said. "I think practicality has its own kind of romance. Choosing to build something together, that means more than fancy words." Morgan smiled at that, and Nora felt warmth spread through her chest. She could do this. She could be happy here. After dinner, she insisted on cleaning up while Morgan went out to secure the animals for the night. By the time he returned, she had tidied the kitchen and was standing on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the landscape transformed by the golden light. "It is beautiful," she said as he joined her. "It is. I never get tired of watching the sunset out here." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Nora, I want you to know I do not expect, that is, we do not have to. Not tonight if you are not ready." Nora turned to look at him, seeing the blush creeping up his neck despite the fading light. This strong, capable man was blushing over the subject of their wedding night. "Morgan, we are married. I understand what that means." "I know, but you have had a long journey, and this is all new, and I do not want you to feel pressured. I can sleep in the main room tonight, give you time to adjust." The offer was kind, but Nora shook her head. "We are husband and wife. We should start as we mean to go on." She was surprised by her own boldness, but something about Morgan made her feel brave. Or perhaps it was simply that she had already taken such a massive risk that this seemed smaller in comparison. Morgan searched her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. If you are sure." "I am sure." They went inside as full darkness fell. Morgan lit the lamps while Nora retreated to the bedroom to change into her nightgown, her hands shaking as she unbuttoned her dress. She had never been with a man before, and despite her brave words, she was terrified. But when Morgan came into the room, still fully dressed, and saw her standing there in her white cotton nightgown with her hair falling loose around her shoulders, his expression was so full of reverence and tenderness that her fear began to ease. "You are beautiful," he said softly. "I cannot believe you are really here." He approached slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But Nora stayed where she was, and when he gently cupped her face in his hands and leaned down to kiss her, she rose up on her toes to meet him. The kiss was careful at first, almost chaste. But then Nora's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the solid muscle call beneath his shirt, and Morgan made a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss. His arms came around her, pulling her against him, and Nora felt surrounded by his warmth and strength. She felt safe in a way she had never experienced before. What followed was tender, despite Morgan's obvious experience and her complete lack of it. He was patient and careful, murmuring reassurances when she tensed, stopping when she needed him to, making sure she was with him every step of the way. And when it was over and they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nora felt tears sliding down her temples. "Did I hurt you?" Morgan asked immediately, rising up on one elbow to look at her with concern. "No," Nora whispered. "No, you were, it was. I am just overwhelmed, I think." He gathered her close, tucking her head beneath his chin. "It is all right, you are safe now, I have you," and lying there in his arms, Nora almost believed she could forget about Victoria, about the deception, about everything except this moment. Almost, but not quite. Because even as she drifted toward sleep, warm and sated and protected, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that this was built on a lie. And eventually, lies always came to light. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that Nora found both exhausting and satisfying. She woke before dawn each day to make breakfast, sending Morgan off to work with a full stomach and coffee strong enough to fuel him through the morning. Then she tackled the endless tasks of keeping a household running in the middle of the desert. She learned to manage the wood stove, to haul water from the well, to beat the dust out of every surface only to have it returned by evening. She tended the small kitchen garden Morgan had started, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil. She mended his clothes, prepared his meals, and slowly began to feel like this was truly her life. Morgan was a good husband, patient and kind and generous with praise. He taught her about the ranch, taking her with him sometimes as he checked on the cattle or repaired fences. She learned to recognize the different animals, learned which ones were pregnant and when they were due to calve. She learned the patterns of the land, where water could be found, which plants were safe and which were poisonous. And at night they came together in their bed, the physical intimacy between them growing easier and more intense. Nora had not expected to want him the way she did, had not anticipated how his touch would make her feel alive and desired in ways she had never imagined. Morgan seemed equally affected, often looking at her during the day with such hunger that she blushed and turned away, counting the hours until evening. But underneath the growing contentment, guilt gnawed at her. Every time Morgan called her by Victoria's name, every time he mentioned something from the letters that Victoria had written, Nora felt the lie like a physical weight on her chest. She told herself it did not matter, that she was being a good wife, that Morgan was happy. But she could not quite silence the voice that said he deserved the truth. It was about 6 weeks after the wedding when things began to unravel. Morgan had ridden into town for supplies, and Nora was alone at the ranch, hanging laundry on the line she had strung between 2 posts. She was humming to herself, thinking about the stew she would make for dinner. When she heard the sound of a horse approaching, she turned, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood turn to ice. The rider was a woman, blonde and beautiful, even dusty from travel, wearing a traveling dress that had probably been fine once. Victoria, Nora's hands dropped to her sides, the wet sheet she had been hanging forgotten. Victoria rode right up to the house, dismounted with easy grace, and stood staring at Nora with an expression that was equal parts defiant and desperate. "Hello, sister," Victoria said. "What are you doing here?" Nora's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I made a mistake. I ran because I was scared, but I have been thinking, and I realized this was my chance at a good life. I want it back. You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." Victoria stepped closer, and Nora could see now that she looked thin, her face gaunt. "I have been in Tucson trying to make it on my own. It is impossible, Nora. I have no money, no prospects. This is mine. You have to tell him the truth and let me take my rightful place." Nora felt anger rising, hot and sharp. "Your rightful place? You abandoned that place. You left me to deal with the consequences of your decision. I know, and I am sorry, but surely you were not planning to keep this charade up forever. You always said lying was wrong. Well, here is your chance to do the right thing." "The right thing?" Nora's voice rose. "The right thing would have been for you to show up for your own wedding. The right thing would have been for you not to put me in an impossible position. So you admit what you did was wrong." Victoria's eyes glittered with something like triumph. "You lied to him, Nora. You married him under false pretenses. What will he think when he finds out?" The question hit Nora like a physical blow, because she had asked herself the same thing 100 times. What would Morgan think? What would he do? Would he hate her, send her away, have the marriage annulled? "Please," Victoria said, her tone shifting to wheedling. "Please, Nora, you have always taken care of me. One more time. Just help me one more time." "No." The word came out firm and clear. "No, Victoria. I am not going to tell Morgan I have been lying to him just so you can waltz in and take over the life I have been building. You made your choice. Live with it." Victoria's face hardened. "Then I will tell him myself. I will ride right back into town and find him and tell him everything. That his wife is an imposter and I am his real bride." "You would do that? You would destroy my life out of spite?" "I am not doing it out of spite. I am doing it because this is mine. You stole it from me. I saved you from humiliation and saved him from being left at the altar. And I have been a good wife to him, Victoria. Better than you ever would have been. That is not for you to decide." Victoria turned back toward her horse. I am going to find him. If you want any chance of explaining first, you had better come with me." Nora stood frozen, her mind racing. She could not let Victoria reach Morgan first, could not let her poison everything with her version of events. But she also could not bear the thought of confessing, of watching Morgan's face as he realized she had been lying to him from the very first moment. "Wait," she called. Victoria paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Please, just let me think. Give me a day to figure this out." "Why should I?" "Because I am your sister. Because despite everything, I love you. Please, Victoria." Victoria studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "One day. But I am staying here, and if you try to turn me away or if he comes home and you do not tell him immediately, I will tell him myself." "Understood?" Nora nodded, feeling numb. This was it, the moment she had dreaded since she signed Victoria's name to the marriage certificate. There was no way out now, no way to keep the truth hidden. One way or another, Morgan was going to find out what she had done. She led Victoria inside, showed her where she could wash up, offered her food. They moved around each other in silence, years of familiarity making words unnecessary. Nora's hands shook as she prepared coffee, her mind desperately searching for solutions that did not exist. "You really care about him, do not you?" Victoria said finally, watching Nora from the table. "This was not just about survival for you." Nora sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "I love him, Victoria. I did not mean to, I did not plan it, but I love him. And I have been lying to him every single day, and when he finds out, he is going to hate me. Maybe he will understand." How could he possibly understand? "I took his choice away. I let him marry me thinking I was someone else. That is unforgivable." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am sorry. I did not think about what this would mean for you. I just wanted out. I wanted escape. And then I realized what I had thrown away and I wanted it back. Well, you cannot have it." Nora's voice was flat. "Even if I tell him the truth and he sends me away, even if he hates me, I will not let you take my place. You do not deserve him. And you do, after lying to him? No, maybe I do not either. But I have tried, Victoria. I have tried so hard to be good to him, to be worthy of the trust he has given me. You would not even try. You would just take and give nothing back the way you always have." Victoria flinched as though Nora had struck her. "I am not as strong as you. I never have been. That is not an excuse. Being weak does not give you the right to hurt other people." They were still sitting in tense silence when they heard the sound of the wagon returning. Nora stood so quickly she nearly knocked over her chair, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it. No more delays, no more hiding. Morgan was home, and she had to tell him the truth. She walked out onto the porch on legs that felt like water. Morgan was just finishing unhitching the horses, and when he looked up and saw her, his face lit up with that smile that always made her chest ache. Then he noticed her expression and his smile faded. "What is wrong?" He strode toward her, all concern. "Nora, what happened? Are you all right?" "I am fine, but there is someone here. Someone you need to meet." Confusion crossed his face, but he followed her inside. Victoria stood in the middle of the main room, her hands clasped in front of her, looking younger and more vulnerable than Nora had seen her in years. Morgan stopped, his gaze moving between the two women. "I do not understand. Who is this?" Nora forced herself to meet his eyes. "Morgan, this is my sister. This is Victoria, Victoria Zimmerman." She watched him process the information, saw the moment understanding began to dawn. His face went very still, very carefully blank. "Your sister?" "Yes, but your name is Victoria Zimmerman." He was looking at Nora now, and there was something in his eyes that made her want to weep. "That is the name on our marriage certificate. That is the name you have been answering to for 6 weeks." "My full name is Leonora," Nora whispered. "Nora, Morgan, I can explain." "Can you?" His voice was cold now, colder than she had ever heard it. "Can you explain why I have been calling my wife by the wrong name? Why I have been married to someone I thought was a completely different person? It was not like that." "Then what was it like, Nora? Or is that even your real name?" "Yes, I swear, Morgan, Nora is my real name. I am Leonora Zimmerman, Victoria's older sister." Morgan turned to Victoria. "And where have you been?" Victoria swallowed hard. "I ran the day before the wedding. I got scared and I ran, and Nora, she took my place. I did not ask her to. I did not know she was going to until just today when I came back." "You came back." Morgan's jaw was tight. "And what did you think was going to happen when you came back?" I hoped, maybe we could make this right. I am the one you were supposed to marry. I am the one who wrote to you." "No," Nora cut in. "No, Victoria, that is not entirely true. You wrote the first letters, but I wrote the last several. The ones where we talked about real things, about plans for the ranch, about what kind of life we wanted. That was me." Morgan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked at Nora with such pain that she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. "Get out, Morgan, please." I said get out. Both of you. I cannot think with you here. I need time." Nora started, but he held up a hand. Just do not, go into town, go anywhere. I do not care, but I need you gone right now before I say something I cannot take back." Nora wanted to argue, wanted to throw herself at his feet and beg for forgiveness, but she could see he was barely holding himself together, could see the fury and hurt warring in his expression. Pushing him now would only make things worse. "All right," she said quietly. "I will go, but please know that I never meant to hurt you. Everything between us, it was real for me. All of it." He did not respond, just turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. Nora gathered a few things, moving mechanically, and then she and Victoria rode back toward town, leading the horse Victoria had rented and leaving Morgan alone with the wreckage of their marriage. They took a room at the boarding house, the same room Nora had stayed in before the wedding. It felt like years ago instead of weeks. Victoria tried to talk to her, but Nora could not bear it. She lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling hollowed out. "I am sorry," Victoria said finally, sitting on the other bed. "I truly am. I did not understand how much this would hurt you." "Just stop talking," Nora said flatly. "I cannot listen to you right now." The hours crawled by. Nora did not sleep, could not even close her eyes without seeing Morgan's face, the betrayal written so clearly across his features. She had done this. She had hurt the one person who had treated her with kindness and respect and love. And for what? For security? For a home? She would trade it all, every moment of the past 6 weeks, to go back and make a different choice, except that was not quite true, was it? Because the past 6 weeks had been the happiest of her life. She had fallen in love with Morgan, with his quiet strength and his gentle hands and his rare smiles. She had fallen in love with the ranch, with the harsh beauty of the desert, with the life they were building together. She had felt, for the first time, like she belonged somewhere, and now it was gone. When morning came, Nora forced herself to get up, to wash her face and put on a clean dress. She left Victoria sleeping and walked to the church, hoping to find some kind of guidance or comfort. Reverend Hughes was there, preparing for Sunday's service. "Mrs. Garrett," he said, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "No," Nora said. "No, Reverend. Everything is very wrong, and I need someone to talk to." He led her to his small office and listened as she poured out the whole sorry tale. To his credit, he did not interrupt, did not judge, just let her speak until she had nothing left to say. "That is quite a situation," he said finally. "And Morgan sent you away?" "He did." He was furious. "I do not blame him. I lied to him, Reverend. I married him under false pretenses. I deserve his anger. Perhaps, but you also deserve forgiveness, if you are truly repentant." "I am. I would do anything to make this right, but I do not think there is a way to make it right. How can he ever trust me again?" Reverend Hughes leaned back in his chair, studying her with kind eyes. "Marriage is not easy under the best of circumstances, and yours began with deception. But I have seen Morgan with you. He cares for you, Mrs. Garrett. He may be angry now, but love does not disappear overnight. He loves Victoria, or the idea of her. Not me, no, my dear. He loves the woman who has been cooking his meals and sharing his bed and working beside him on his ranch. He loves the woman who wrote him those later letters. That woman is you, not your sister. He just needs time to see that. What if he never does? What if he cannot forgive me? Then you will have to accept that and find a way forward. But do not give up yet. Give him time to work through his feelings. Then go to him and fight for your marriage. If it is truly what you want." "It is," Nora whispered. "It is everything I want." She thanked the Reverend and walked back out into the morning sun. Castle Dome was coming awake around her, people starting their daily routines. She stood on the church steps and looked out toward the desert, toward where the ranch waited 10 miles away. Morgan was out there, alone and hurting, and every instinct screamed at her to go to him. But she forced herself to wait. She would give him the rest of the day. Tomorrow she would go back and face whatever came next. She returned to the boarding house to find Victoria awake and pacing the small room. "Where did you go?" "To talk to the Reverend." "And what did he say?" "That I need to give Morgan time and then fight for my marriage." Victoria stopped pacing. "Your marriage. Not mine. It was never yours, Victoria. Not really. You did not want it, remember? You ran." "I know, and I keep thinking about that, about why I ran." Victoria sank onto the bed, her shoulders slumped. "I was scared. I have been scared my whole life. I think. Scared of responsibility, scared of failure, scared of being trapped, but mostly scared of not being enough." Nora sat beside her. "What are you talking about? You have always been the strong one, Nora. You took care of me after Mama died. You worked and sacrificed and held everything together, and I never felt like I could do that. So I convinced myself I did not want to, that I wanted excitement and adventure instead of boring old responsibility. But the truth is I was just too afraid to try, Victoria. When I got here and realized this was real, that I was going to have to be a wife and run a household and be responsible for another person's happiness, I panicked. I ran because I did not think I could do it. But you just stepped in and did it like it was nothing. Because you are brave, Nora, and I am a coward." Nora put her arm around her sister, feeling the familiar protective instinct rise despite everything. "You are not a coward, you are just young. I am 20 years old, that is old enough to know better." Victoria leaned her head on Nora's shoulder. I am going to leave. I am going back to St. Louis and I am going to find a job and I am going to figure out how to take care of myself. It is past time. What will you do there? I do not know yet, but I will figure it out. I have to. I cannot keep running to you to fix my problems. She pulled back, meeting Nora's eyes. And I cannot keep trying to take what is yours. You love him. He loves you, even if he does not know it yet. This marriage should be yours. What about the name on the certificate? So change it. Have it amended or do another ceremony or whatever needs to be done legally. But the marriage, the real marriage, belongs to you and Morgan, not me. Nora felt tears sliding down her cheeks. When did you get so wise? About 5 minutes ago. Victoria managed a watery smile. Better late than never, right? They held each other for a long moment. Then Victoria pulled away and started gathering her things. The stage leaves this afternoon. I need to be on it. Do you have money? A little. Enough to get me back east. I will make it work. Nora went to her trunk and pulled out the small amount of money she had tucked away. Emergency funds she had saved from her seamstress work. Take this. Please. Nora, I cannot. Yes, you can. Just this one last time, let me help you. And then you are on your own. Victoria took the money, her eyes bright with tears. Thank you, for everything, for always believing I could be better than I was. You can be. You will be. They walked to the stage depot together, and Nora stood watching as Victoria climbed aboard. Her sister looked young and scared and determined, and Nora felt a fierce rush of hope that maybe, just maybe, Victoria would actually follow through this time. The stage pulled away in a cloud of dust, and Nora was alone. She spent the rest of the day preparing herself for what came next. She bought fabric from the general store and sat on the boarding house porch, sewing by the fading light. Her hands needed something to do, something familiar and calming. She made a new shirt for Morgan, putting careful stitches into the soft cotton, pouring all her love and regret into the work. That night she barely slept. When dawn broke, she was already awake, already dressed. She rented a horse from the livery, tied her small bundle of possessions behind the saddle, and rode out toward the ranch. The sun was just clearing the horizon when she arrived. The house looked lonely in the early light, no smoke rising from the chimney, no sounds of activity. Nora dismounted and walked slowly to the door. Her heart in her throat, she knocked, and when there was no answer, she tried the handle. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Morgan was sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him, staring at nothing. He looked like he had not slept, his eyes red-rimmed, his jaw dark with stubble. When he heard her enter, his gaze swung toward her, but his expression remained closed. I told you I needed time, he said. I know, and I have given you a day and a night, but I cannot stay away any longer, Morgan. This is my home. You are my husband, and I need to fight for that. Your home, your husband. His laugh was bitter. Except I am not really your husband, am I? I married someone else. You married me. Nora moved further into the room, her hands clasped tightly together. The name might have been wrong, but everything else was real. The vows I spoke, the life we have been building, the way I feel about you, all of it was real. How am I supposed to believe that? How am I supposed to trust anything you say when our entire marriage started with a lie? I do not know, Nora's voice broke. I do not know how to make you trust me again. But I am willing to try. I will do whatever it takes, Morgan. I will answer any question you have. I will prove myself every day for the rest of my life if that is what you need. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Why did you do it? That is what I cannot understand. Why did you take her place? Because I had no other choice. The words poured out of Nora in a rush. Victoria ran, and I had no money to get back home, no prospects waiting for me there. I had nothing, Morgan. My mother was dead, my father long gone, and I had spent years barely surviving while taking care of a sister who only thought of herself. When Victoria left, I was terrified. And then I thought, maybe I could do this, maybe I could be the wife you needed. So I made a choice. It was selfish and wrong, and I have regretted it every day since. But I made it because I wanted a chance at a life that was mine. You stole that chance from me. You took away my choice about who I was marrying. I know, tears were streaming down Nora's face now. I know, and I am so sorry. You deserved better. You deserved honesty. But Morgan, please try to understand. I did not know you then. I did not know you were kind and good and exactly the sort of man I had dreamed of finding. I just saw a way out of an impossible situation. And then I got to know you, and I fell in love with you, and every day I have been terrified that you would discover the truth and hate me for it. He stared at her, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. You love me, yes. God help me, yes. I love you so much it hurts. I love the way you care for the animals and the way you look at the sunset and the way you laugh when something surprises you. I love your strength and your patience and the way you hold me at night like I am something precious. I love you, Morgan Garrett, and I am so sorry I started everything with a lie. The silence stretched between them, thick and painful. Then Morgan said, the woman I fell in love with, the woman who wrote me those letters and made me laugh and made me think maybe I could have more than just survival. That was you? Yes. Victoria wrote the first letters, the flowery romantic ones, but she got bored and I took over. I tried to be honest with you, as honest as I could be without revealing the truth. Everything I wrote about who I was and what I wanted, that was real. And the past 6 weeks, was any of that real? All of it. Nora took a step toward him, emboldened by the slight softening in his expression. Every moment, Morgan. Every meal I cooked and every conversation we had and every night we spent together. That was me, the real me, not pretending to be anyone else. Just Nora, falling more in love with you every single day. Morgan's hand came up to rub his face, and when he dropped it, Nora could see the exhaustion and confusion written across his features. I do not know what to do with this. I do not know how to reconcile the woman I thought I married with the woman standing in front of me. They are the same person, Nora said softly. I am the same woman who has been here all along. The only difference is now you know my real name. It is more than that, and you know it. But there was less anger in his voice now, more weariness. You lied to me, Nora. For weeks, I did. And I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you will let me. But Morgan, I need you to understand something. I am a better person with you. Being your wife, building this life with you, it has made me feel like I matter, like I am worth something. Please do not take that away from me. Please do not send me away. He was quiet for so long that Nora thought he might not answer at all. Then he said, Where is Victoria? Gone. She left yesterday, went back to St. Louis. She realized that this life was not what she wanted, and that it was not hers to take, so she just left again? Yes. But this time it is for good. She is going to figure out her own life, make her own way. She is not coming back. Morgan walked to the window, looking out at the land he had worked so hard to build something on. I spent all night thinking about what you said when you left, about how everything between us was real. And the thing is, I believe you. I can look back at the past 6 weeks and see that you were not pretending. You were being yourself, and the woman you were being is exactly who I thought I married. Hope flared in Nora's chest. Then can you forgive me? I do not know. He turned to face her, and his expression was open in a way it had not been since he discovered the truth. But I want to try. I do not want to lose what we have built together. I need some help here, Nora. I need you to be patient with me while I work through this. I can do that. Nora crossed the room to stand in front of him, looking up into his tired face. I can be patient. I can give you time. Just please do not shut me out completely. Let me stay. Let me show you that I can be the wife you need. Morgan lifted his hand and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. You already are the wife I need. That is what makes this so hard. Even knowing you lied to me, even being angry at you, I still love you. I spent all night trying to convince myself I did not, and I could not do it. A sob escaped Nora's throat. You love me? Yes. The word was simple, but the emotion behind it was anything but. I love you. I am furious with you, and I feel betrayed, and I do not know how to trust you right now. But I love you. I will earn that trust back, Nora promised. However long it takes, I will earn it back. Morgan pulled her into his arms, and Nora buried her face against his chest. Breathing in the familiar scent of him, he was still here, he was still holding her. They had a chance. We need to fix the legal stuff, Morgan said into her hair. The marriage certificate, all of it. I want your real name on those documents. We will. Whatever needs to be done, we will do it. They stood there for a long time holding each other in the morning light. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The next weeks were difficult. Morgan was trying, Nora could see that, but there was a wariness in him now that had not been there before. He watched her sometimes like he was looking for cracks in her facade, waiting for another deception to reveal itself. Nora bore it patiently, understanding that trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight. They rode into town together and spoke with Reverend Hughes about the situation. He was sympathetic and helped them navigate the legal complications. They had to file paperwork with the territorial government to amend the marriage certificate, a process that required written statements and notarized documents. It was embarrassing, having to explain the situation to the clerk and the notary, but Nora held her head high and answered every question honestly. She would not compound her lies with more deception. They also had a quiet private ceremony in the church, just the three of them and Mrs. Hughes as witness, where Nora spoke her vows again using her real name. This time, when Morgan kissed her at the Reverend's pronouncement, there was less hesitation, more certainty. Now we are truly married, he said afterward, and Nora nodded, feeling like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As autumn arrived and the brutal heat began to ease, Nora poured herself into the ranch work with renewed determination. She learned to handle a rifle so she could protect the property when Morgan was working the far pastures. She helped with the cattle, discovering she had a knack for the patient, steady work of tending animals. She expanded the garden, putting in vegetables that would grow through the cooler months. Every day she tried to prove through her actions that she was committed to this life, to him. Slowly, gradually, she felt Morgan softening toward her, The wariness in his eyes faded, replaced by the warmth and affection she had known before. He started touching her again with the casual intimacy of a husband, a hand on her back as he passed, fingers tangling with hers as they walked to the barn. Their conversations grew easier, the silences less fraught. One evening, about 3 months after the truth had come out, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Morgan said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "The way you took care of your sister all those years, the way you sacrificed for her. That takes a lot of strength." Nora glanced at him, surprised. "I did what I had to do." "No, it was more than that. You could have put her in an orphanage after your mother died. You could have left her to fend for herself when she became difficult, but you did not. You stayed and you provided for her and you kept trying to help her become better." He paused. "That same strength, that same determination, that is what I see in you now. You made a mistake, a big one. But you are facing the consequences instead of running. You are fighting for us, and I respect that, Nora. I respect you." Tears stung Nora's eyes. "Thank you. That means everything to me. I forgive you." The words were quiet but firm. "For the lie, for the deception, for all of it. I forgive you." Nora turned to him, searching his face. "Truly, truly, I do not want to spend the rest of our lives with this shadow hanging over us. What is done is done. Now we move forward." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and relief and love into it. Morgan responded with equal fervor, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I thank God for you every day," he said. "Even on the days when I was angry, even when I felt betrayed. I still thank God that you came into my life. Because you are exactly what I needed, Nora. Exactly who I needed. And you are what I needed," she whispered back. "A man who could see past my mistakes to who I really am. A man who could forgive." That night, their intimacy took on a different quality, deeper and more profound than it had been even before. It felt like a true marriage now, founded not on deception but on honesty and choice. They had both chosen each other, with full knowledge of who they really were, and that made all the difference. As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, the ranch thrived. The cattle were healthy, the garden productive. Morgan talked about expanding, maybe buying more land, maybe hiring help. He included Nora in all the planning, asking her opinion, valuing her input. She felt like a true partner, not just a wife but an equal participant in building their future. In December, Nora began to suspect she might be pregnant. She missed her monthly courses, felt nauseated in the mornings, and experienced a bone-deep exhaustion she had never known before. She waited to be sure, not wanting to raise Morgan's hopes if she was wrong. But when another month passed and the signs only grew stronger, she knew it was time to tell him. She chose Christmas Eve, after they had exchanged small gifts and eaten the special meal she had prepared. They were sitting by the fire, Morgan's arm around her shoulders, when she said, "I have something to tell you." He looked down at her, his expression curious. "What is it?" "I think I am almost certain that I am with child." Morgan went very still. Then his hand moved to rest gently on her stomach, his eyes wide with wonder. "A baby?" "Yes, our baby." A smile spread across his face, slow and brilliant and full of joy. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Nora asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" "Nora, I cannot even find words for what I am feeling right now." He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her carefully like she was made of glass. "A child, our child. It is everything I hoped for." "I am scared," Nora admitted. "My mother died when Victoria and I were young. I do not have anyone to teach me how to be a mother." "You will figure it out. You are strong and capable, and you have more love in you than anyone I have ever known. You will be an amazing mother." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift." That night, as they lay in bed, Morgan's hand never left her stomach. He talked about names, about expanding the house to make room for the baby, about teaching their child to ride and work the ranch. Nora listened, feeling a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had wanted without even knowing she wanted it. A family, a home, a future that was bright and full of promise. The pregnancy was not easy. The desert heat returned with a vengeance in the spring, and Nora struggled with it, her body already working hard to grow the baby. Morgan was attentive and worried, constantly making sure she was drinking enough water, resting enough, not working too hard. He took over more of the household tasks, insisting she conserve her strength. Mrs. Hughes came to visit regularly, bringing advice and supplies and a comforting presence. She had raised 4 children of her own and had a wealth of practical knowledge. Nora was grateful for her friendship, for having another woman to talk to during the long days when Morgan was out working the ranch. In July, as the heat reached its peak, Nora went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through an entire night and into the next day. Morgan stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. Mrs. Hughes acted as midwife, her calm competence a steadying force. When their daughter finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Nora wept with relief and joy and exhaustion. Morgan took the baby in his large, careful hands and looked down at her with such love that Nora's heart felt like it might burst. "She is beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She is perfect." They named her Margaret Rose after Nora's mother, Maggie for short. She had Morgan's dark hair and Nora's blue eyes, and from the very beginning she had a strong will and a loud voice. Morgan was utterly besotted, spending hours just watching her sleep, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. As Maggie grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Morgan hired 2 ranch hands, young men who worked hard and were respectful of Nora. The house was expanded, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They bought more cattle, more land. The future that had once seemed so uncertain now felt solid and real. When Maggie was 2 years old, a letter arrived from St. Louis. It was from Victoria, the first communication Nora had received from her sister since she left. Nora's hands shook as she opened it, unsure what to expect. The letter was warm and full of news. Victoria had found work as a teacher in a small school. She had married a clerk named Joseph, a kind man who loved her despite knowing all about her past mistakes. She was happy, she wrote, truly happy, in a way she had never been before. She thanked Nora for always believing in her, for giving her the chance to finally grow up. Nora read the letter aloud to Morgan that evening, and when she finished, he said, "I am glad she found her way. So am I. I was worried about her for so long. Knowing she is happy, that she has built a good life, it feels like a weight off my shoulders. You were a good sister to her. You never gave up on her. I hope I can be as good a mother to Maggie." Morgan pulled her close. "You already are. She is lucky to have you." The years passed in a rhythm of work and family and love. Maggie was joined by a brother Matthew and then another daughter Lily. The house rang with the sounds of children playing, and the ranch flourished under Morgan's careful management. Nora's days were full to bursting with cooking and cleaning and caring for the children, but she would not have traded it for anything. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Morgan gave her a locket, a delicate gold piece with their anniversary date engraved on the back. Inside, he had placed tiny photographs of their 3 children. "I wanted you to have something beautiful," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "Something to remind you of all we have built together." Nora touched the locket, then looked up at her husband. He was 40 now, his hair starting to show gray at the temples, his face lined from years of sun and wind. But to her he was as handsome as the day she first saw him in that church. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Forgiving me? Staying with me? Not for a single moment." His answer was immediate and certain. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora. You and our children, this life we have made. I thank God for you every day, exactly as I promised I would. I thank God for you too, for your patience and your forgiveness and your love. I did not deserve it, but you gave it to me anyway." "We deserved each other," Morgan said firmly. "We were both looking for someone to build a life with, and we found that in each other. The beginning was messy, but the middle and the end, those are ours. Those are beautiful." They stood on the porch as the sun set, watching their children play in the yard. Maggie was 10 now, chasing Matthew, who was 7, while little Lily toddled after them on unsteady legs. The desert spread out around them, harsh and beautiful, the same landscape that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely love story. "Tell me the truth," Nora said quietly. "If Victoria had shown up for the wedding, if I had never taken her place, do you think you would have been happy with her?" Morgan considered the question seriously. "No, I do not think I would have. Victoria wanted something I could not give her. Excitement, romance, escape from responsibility. You wanted what I wanted. Partnership, home, family. We fit together, Nora, in a way I never would have fit with your sister. So maybe it all happened exactly as it was supposed to. Maybe it did. Or maybe we just made the best of what we were given and turned it into something wonderful. Both can be true." "Yes," Morgan agreed, pulling her into his arms. "Both can be true." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast Arizona sky, they called the children in for dinner. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Inside there was laughter and the clatter of dishes and the comfortable chaos of family life. Nora looked around at her home, at her children, at her husband, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had come to this place as an imposter, terrified and desperate, pretending to be someone she was not. But she had found herself here. She had found love and purpose and belonging. The lie that had started everything had been forgiven and forgotten, buried under 10 years of honest living and genuine love. What remained was a marriage stronger than most, built on the bedrock of tested commitment and hard-won trust. Morgan caught her eye across the table as he helped Matthew cut his meat, and he smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip a beat. She smiled back, and in that moment she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Maggie grew into a capable young woman who could ride as well as any of the ranch hands and had inherited her father's practical nature. Matthew was quieter, more studious, spending his free time reading the books Morgan ordered from back east. Lily was the wild one, fearless and adventurous, keeping Nora constantly on her toes. When Nora was 35, she discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that delighted Morgan and made the older children equal parts excited and horrified. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body remembering what to do. She gave birth to twin boys James and Henry, who looked so much like Morgan that it made everyone laugh. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the territory. Morgan's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle had spread, and they were doing better than either of them had ever imagined possible. But success had not changed Morgan. He still worked alongside his men, still came home dusty and tired every evening, still treated Nora with the same careful tenderness he had shown from the beginning. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, and Morgan would tell her stories about his time in the mountains, about the men he had known and the things he had seen. Nora would tell him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother's strength and her sister's wildness. They filled in the gaps of each other's histories, weaving their separate paths into a shared story. Victoria wrote occasionally, her letters full of news about her own growing family. She and Joseph had 4 children, and she taught at the same school where her oldest daughter now attended. She seemed genuinely happy, content in the life she had built. Sometimes Nora wondered what would have happened if Victoria had stayed, if she had gone through with the original plan. But those thoughts never lasted long. The life she had now was too full, too precious to waste time on what-ifs. When Nora turned 40, Morgan threw her a party, inviting neighbors from miles around. The house and yard were full of people, the air thick with laughter and music and the smell of roasting meat. Their children ran wild with the other kids, and Nora stood in the middle of it all, watching her husband charm their guests with his quiet humor, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Mrs. Hughes, now in her 70s but still spry, came to stand beside her. "You have built a beautiful life here, Nora. Thank you. I still cannot quite believe it sometimes that all of this is mine. You earned it, dear. Every bit of it. You took a terrible situation and turned it into something wonderful. That takes courage and determination and love. I could not have done it without Morgan. He is the best man I have ever known. He would say the same about you. I see the way he looks at you. After all these years, he is still absolutely devoted. That is rare, Nora. Treasure it. I do, every single day." As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Morgan found Nora and pulled her into a dance right there in the yard with half their neighbors watching. Nora laughed and let him spin her around, not caring that she was too old for such silliness, not caring about anything except the feel of his arms around her and the joy on his face. "I love you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "I love you too," Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for seeing past the lie to who I really am. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on this life, on me. I know it was not easy. It was the best decision I ever made." They swayed together as someone played a fiddle, the music drifting out over the desert. Their children watched with expressions ranging from embarrassment to delight, and their friends applauded when Morgan dipped Nora dramatically at the end of the song. That night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Nora and Morgan lay in their bed, the window open to let in the cool night air. "Do you ever think about the future?" Nora asked. "About what happens when we are old and the children are grown?" "All the time. I think about how we will sit on that porch and watch our grandchildren play. How we will tell them stories about building this ranch from nothing. How we will grow old together, still holding hands, still in love. That sounds perfect. It does not it?" Morgan rolled to face her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I meant what I said earlier. I thank God for you every single day. You saved me, Nora, from loneliness, from a life that was all work and no joy. You gave me everything I did not even know I was missing. You saved me too, from poverty and fear and a life where I was always taking care of everyone else but never being cared for myself. You gave me a home, a family, love, real love, the kind I never thought I would find." They kissed, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 20 years of shared history and the promise of decades more to come. When they finally settled into sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Nora felt a contentment so deep it was like a physical presence in the room. The years continued their steady march. Maggie married a rancher from a neighboring property, giving Nora and Morgan their first grandchild just a year later. Matthew went east to study law, eventually returning to Arizona to practice in Tucson but visiting the ranch regularly. Lily, to everyone's surprise, married a doctor and moved to Phoenix, where she helped her husband establish his practice while raising 3 rambunctious boys. The twins, James and Henry, showed every sign of taking over the ranch someday, both of them inheriting their father's love of the land and his skill with cattle. As Nora moved into her 50s, she slowed down somewhat, letting her daughters-in-law take over more of the household work. She spent her days tending her garden, playing with her grandchildren, and working on the quilts she had taken up making. Each quilt told a story, patterns and colors chosen to represent different moments from their life together. Morgan slowed down too, finally hiring a foreman to handle the day-to-day operations of the ranch. He still went out every morning to check on things, but he came back earlier now, spending long afternoons with Nora on the porch, watching the desert and talking about everything and nothing. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party even bigger than the one for Nora's 40th birthday. People came from all over the territory, friends they had made over decades of living and working in Arizona. There were speeches and toasts and a cake so large it took 3 people to carry it. When it was Morgan's turn to speak, he stood up and pulled Nora to stand beside him. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, I married a woman I thought I knew from letters and one photograph. Turns out I did not know her at all. But over the past 25 years, I have gotten to know the real Nora Garrett. I have watched her raise our children with love and patience. I have seen her work herself to exhaustion to make our home beautiful and welcoming. I have witnessed her kindness to neighbors and strangers alike, and I have fallen more in love with her every single year. So here is to my wife, my partner, my best friend. Here is to 25 years and to 50 more if God is willing. The crowd erupted in applause and Nora buried her face in Morgan's chest, overwhelmed with emotion. He held her close and she felt his lips brush the top of her head. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for all of this. No, he whispered back, thank you for taking a chance, for staying, for loving me even when I was angry and hurt, for building this beautiful life with me. They danced that night, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, and Nora thought about the girl she had been when she first arrived in Castle Dome. That girl had been so scared, so desperate, so convinced that she was making the worst mistake of her life. If only she could have known how it would all turn out. If only she could have seen this future, maybe she would not have spent so many nights lying awake, terrified of discovery. But perhaps the fear had been necessary. Perhaps not knowing how things would work out was part of what made the happy ending so sweet. As they grew older, Nora and Morgan's love only deepened. They developed the comfortable intimacy of a couple who had lived together for decades, who could communicate with a glance, who knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken. They had weathered storms together, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger on the other side. When Nora was 60, she received word that Victoria had passed away suddenly, a fever taking her before the doctors could do anything. Nora grieved for her sister, for the difficult, beautiful, complicated woman she had been. Morgan held her through the tears, understanding that despite everything, Nora had loved Victoria and always would. She found happiness in the end, Morgan reminded her gently. She had a good life, a family who loved her. That is because of you, at least in part. You never gave up on her. I wish I could have seen her one more time. Told her I forgave her for everything. She knew, I am sure she knew. At Victoria's request, she was buried in St. Louis near their mother. Nora could not make the journey, her health not what it used to be, but she stood on the porch of her Arizona home and said a prayer for her sister, wishing her peace. The ranch passed to James and Henry when Morgan decided it was time to fully retire. He was 65, Nora 62, and they had earned their rest. They stayed in the house, of course, now surrounded by the sounds of their grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren playing in the yard where their own children had once played. Morgan's hair was fully gray now, his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But to Nora he was as handsome as ever, his eyes still bright with intelligence and humor, his smile still capable of making her heart flutter. They spent their days in quiet contentment, reading, talking, watching the desert they had both come to love so deeply. On a spring morning when Nora was 68, she woke to find Morgan still asleep beside her, something that was unusual. He always woke first, usually watching her sleep with that soft expression he thought she did not notice. But this morning he lay on his side facing her, his breathing slow and even more peaceful than she had ever seen him. "Morgan," she said softly, reaching out to touch his shoulder. He did not respond. "Morgan," she said again, louder now, shaking him gently. Still nothing. Understanding crashed over her like a wave. She pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse, but found nothing. Morgan was gone. He had slipped away in his sleep, peaceful and painless, leaving her behind. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain in her chest that made it hard to breathe. But even through the tears, even through the crushing sense of loss, Nora felt grateful. Grateful that he had not suffered, that he had died peacefully in his own bed. Grateful for every single one of the 40 years they had spent together. Grateful that she had been brave enough, foolish enough, desperate enough to take her sister's place all those years ago. The funeral was massive. People coming from across the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been fair and honest and kind. Nora stood surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy of love that stretched far beyond anything she could have imagined that hot August day when she first arrived in Castle Dome. In the months after Morgan's death, Nora felt adrift. The house was full of family, James and Henry making sure she was never alone, but she missed Morgan with an ache that never quite faded. She missed his laugh, his steady presence, the way he always knew exactly what to say to make her feel better. One evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set, her granddaughter Maggie Jr. sat down beside her. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of how you and Grandpa met?" Nora hesitated. The truth had come out years ago, told to the children when they were old enough to understand. But the story had become family legend, the details softened and romanticized over time. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "I want to know if you were scared when you decided to take Aunt Victoria's place. If you worried it would all go wrong." "I was terrified," Nora admitted. "I thought I was making the worst mistake of my life. I thought your grandfather would discover the truth and hate me for it. But he did not. No, he was angry when he found out, hurt and betrayed. But he loved me more than he was angry. He chose forgiveness over bitterness. And that choice, that generous, loving choice, gave us 40 years of happiness together." "I think that is the most romantic thing I have ever heard," Maggie Jr. said softly. "Do you?" "I always thought it was rather messy and complicated. That is what makes it romantic. It was not perfect. You both made mistakes. But you chose each other anyway every single day. That is real love, Grandma, the kind worth having." Nora smiled through her tears. Yes, it is." She lived another 5 years after Morgan's death, surrounded by family, watching her grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow. She told stories about the ranch, about the early days, about the man who had taken a chance on a woman pretending to be someone else and had loved the real her instead. When she died peacefully in her sleep at 73, they buried her next to Morgan on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone read, "Nora and Morgan Garrett, partners in life, united in death." Their love built a legacy, and that legacy lived on in the ranch that still thrived, in the children and grandchildren who carried their names and their values, in the story that became family history, passed down through generations. The story of a woman who made a desperate choice, and a man who chose forgiveness, and the love that bloomed between them against all odds. In the end, it did not matter that their beginning had been built on deception. What mattered was the 40 years of honesty and love and partnership that followed. What mattered was that they had chosen each other over and over again, through good times and bad, through anger and forgiveness, through all the messy, complicated reality of building a life together. Their story was not perfect, but it was real, and it was beautiful, and it was theirs. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.